Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into the folds of silk and felt, where the air smells faintly of fermented milk, wood smoke, and something warmer skin, perfume, politics. You're not in a palace. There are no marble columns here. Instead, you're approaching a vast circular tent, a garret domed and imposing, glowing from within like a lantern dropped on the vast black steps. You step through the heavy flap, and the heat hits you dry, smoky, thick with stories. You're inside the private tent of a Mongol Khan, and here, everything matters. Who speaks first? Who laughs too hard? Who sits closest to the bed? The rugs beneath your feet are yak felt, thick and patterned with strange symbols. They mute your footsteps, which is good because you probably won't survive this night if you draw too much attention. The tent is a sensory labyrinth. Layers of silk hang from the ceiling in pale reds and golds, forming intimate corners and secret spaces. The light comes from dozens of low oil lamps and flickering coals set in shallow bronze bowls, giving everyone a honey golden sheen and hiding every sharp edge and shadow. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You haven't been here long, and already your senses are doing backflips. The tent is massive, more like a portable palace than a campsite. Think Persian brothel meets command center. Pillows embroidered with the teeth of defeated enemies rest casually beside bowls of honeyed nuts and pearled drinking cups. There's a couch near the back. It's not quite a throne, not quite a bed, and that's where the can will eventually recline, legs stretched like a bored lion. You won't see him yet, though. He arrives last. Instead, you see the courtiers, the favored wives, the high-ranking concubines. They enter in waves, some with attendants peeling off layers of embroidered silk, others trailing scented smoke and jeweled laughter. There's protocol, of course. You can't just plop down anywhere. Some cushions are charged with more power than the imperial seal. And the tent, it breathes. It flexes with every gust of wind outside, every whisper of movement inside. This isn't a stiff stone fortress. It's alive. Fabric rustles like skirts. The smoke swirls in lazy spirals near the ceiling. One of the women, her braid thick enough to be mistaken for a rope, leans over to adjust her shoe, and you see someone across the room pretend not to look. Everyone's pretending not to look at everyone else. Which is, of course, its own kind of looking. The Mongols were famously mobile, and their tents were built to reflect that philosophy. But this isn't just a sleeping space, it's an engine of influence. And tonight, like many nights, things will be decided here that might never make it into official records. Who marries whom, who gets demoted, who gets exiled, slowly, politely, through flirtation and side eyes. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan's private tents were modeled more after Chinese court interiors or Turkic traditions, but what's clear is that they were hybrid spaces designed for both pleasure and political maneuvering. And believe me, those two things were not mutually exclusive. You shuffle toward the side cushions where the junior officials sit. You're offered a bowl of something warm, and you try not to wrinkle your nose. It smells like someone strained yogurt through a barn. That's arag, fermented Mari's milk. It's fizzy, slightly sour, and somehow strangely effective. After 3 sips, your limbs begin to feel suspiciously friendly with your body. The tent's central hearth smokes gently. It's symbolic. To every Mongol ger had its fire at the heart. That flame connects heaven to earth, and you do not, under any circumstances, step over it. Not unless you want to wake up as a cautionary tale. A few guards stand near the exits, looking mostly bored. They've seen everything. Diplomats from Persia passed out with eyeliner smeared. Princesses arguing about who gets to sit closest to the bed. Envoys waking up beside people they probably shouldn't mention in their letters home. They don't flinch when someone giggles behind a curtain or when someone else drops a belt accidentally, of course. Now, pay attention because everything that happens in this tent tonight will happen softly. That's the key. There's no shouting here, no declarations. Everything is layered, voice over perfume, skin over silk, intention over laughter. Someone raises a hand and the music starts. It's slow, strange, foreign. A woman with fingers like willow branches plucks a Morin chord, the horsehead fiddle that makes the air hum like a distant gallop. Another taps a small drum between her knees, but it's barely audible. You notice the walls now lined with painted skins and gilded weaponry. A curved blade hangs above a bed that looks like it's seen fewer battles than the rest of the tent, but maybe just as many conquests. And suddenly he enters. Without turning. The air shifts. Someone inhales too fast. The lamps flicker okay. That might just be your imagination. But there he is, the Khan himself, taller than you expected, broader, wearing a robe that looks casual, but probably costs more than a herd of goats. His eyes skim the tent like he's seeing everything. No one speaks, not yet. He gestures slightly there, and someone begins fanning the hearth. He doesn't sit on the throne bed yet. He strolls. Sometimes he stops beside a guest and murmurs something. Sometimes he just looks, and they flush under his gaze. This is not just a man. This is a myth in motion. And yes, there are stories. Stories of what happened in these tents. Things whispered by traders on the Silk Roads. By lovers who escaped with only a necklace and a grin. Some say the Khan kept secret levers hidden behind movable panels. Others believe the whole tent was designed to confuse spies with false walls and decoy beds. The truth? You're living it. Right now. You catch the eye of someone across the room. Her smile is slow, not quite invitation, not quite threat. You're not sure whether to smile back. The Eric tells you yes. Your instincts say maybe not. Behind you, laughter bubbles. Someone murmurs a verse of poetry, something about stars caught in hair. A woman leans close to the Khan and says something in his ear. He nods. She doesn't return to her seat. The night is only just beginning. The night starts with Mari's milk and mischief. The fermented Mari's milk arag doesn't get better on the second bowl, but it does start to blur the edges of everything. Your muscles loosen, your thoughts meander, and the flicker of torchlight around the tent seems to stretch time like warm dough. You're definitely not in your usual bedtime routine anymore. You're deep inside a Mongol royal tent, and tonight fermented milk is the gateway drug to all kinds of mischief. You hold the shallow bowl with both hands as is custom. Slurping is acceptable here, oddly enough, and so is staring, though only when you're subtle about it. Around you, the mood has shifted. It's no longer just the formal rustle of courtly positioning. The second round of drinks has been passed, and with it, the social rules have started to melt like snow on a warm yurt roof. The Mongol court had a rhythm of its own, especially at night. The early hours of feasting and ceremony were all about show-respectful toasts, veiled nods, elaborate praise recitations. But then, slowly, the masks began to slip. A concubine plucks a tune that's a little too familiar, too flirtatious. A junior commander says something just over the line of what's appropriate, and everyone pretends not to notice that the Khan left. You shift your weight on the cushions and glance across the room. Two of the Khan's favored wives sit near the central fire, laughing low and close, their knees just brushing. One of them wears a golden robe that gleams like candlelight. Her fingers are stained red with powdered berries, a cosmetic touch popular among the elite, meant to give the lips a just-bitten flush. You notice several men noticing her. Nearby, a young aristocrat, barely 20, if you had to guess, is swaying as he tries to refill his own drink. A servant gently intercepts him and offers the bowl instead, never breaking eye contact. She smiles, but it's not sweet. It's the smile of someone who's worked too many of these nights to be impressed by awkward flirting. Historians still argue whether the nighttime rituals of the Mongol elite were formally scheduled or evolved spontaneously from within the tent's shifting energy. There's no clear manual, no scroll of protocols that dictated exactly when the mood tipped from diplomatic to debauched. But the consensus is this: the lines were intentionally blurred. And right now, you're in the blur. A man across from you, not Mongol, probably Uyghur or maybe a Central Asian trader, leans forward to ask a question. His breath smells like almonds and horse sweat. "Is this your first time at a Khan's tent?" he whispers. You nod, careful to look just curious enough, but not overeager. "Then you'll want to pace yourself," he says, raising his brows meaningfully. "The milk's just the first trick." He's not wrong. The air egg is spiked. Not in the literal sense. No narcotics here, at least not officially, but the fermentation alone is potent. More importantly, it's a ritual lubricant. It softens tongues and hardens intentions. It helps a Persian envoy speak a little too frankly, a Mongol noblewoman laugh a little louder than usual, and you start noticing details you didn't before. For example, the slow, measured dance of veils. You hadn't realized it, but a few of the musicians at the edge of the tent are now performing, not just playing. Their music's tempo has slowed, their bodies weaving side to side like grass and wind. A reed flute sings something lilting and vaguely hypnotic, while one of the dancers flicks her silk veil in a pattern that seems more code than choreography. The room watches, wrapped and silent, as the fabrics twist and reveal, tease and hide. Mongol culture wasn't known for theatrical restraint. Their celebrations were full-throated, their passions unapologetic. But here, in the Khan's private world, everything is controlled abandon. Even the eroticism is calculated, slow-blooming, never vulgar, never loud. You lean back, letting your head rest lightly against the rolled felt wall behind you. The tent smells faintly of horsehair and rosewater. Someone nearby is roasting pine nuts over a tiny brazier, their sweet, oily scent briefly cutting through the musk and sweat and sour milk. That's when the second round of guests enter. This group is different. They're not seated. They're not even announced. A flap near the rear of the tent opens with just enough flare to be noticed, but not enough to interrupt anything. And through it glide 3 more women cloaked, veiled, and barefoot. They move like smoke, slow, deliberate, meant to be watched. The room quiets. The dancers pause. The music doesn't stop, but it changes key, becomes deeper, more intimate. These women don't belong to the court exactly, but they're not outsiders either. Companions, maybe. Possibly consorts. Or just guests chosen by the Khan himself. Their status is fluid, like everything else here. One of them walks past you. Her footfalls are silent, her perfume an unfamiliar mix of juniper, leather, and cinnamon. You don't look directly at her, no one does, but you can feel the heat she radiates, like a lamp behind gauze. She sits close to the hearth, and a space opens around her without anyone saying a word. "See," the almond breath man murmurs beside you again. "Milk, music." Then the games begin. You want to ask what games, but you're not sure you want to know. And besides, part of you already does. The woman with the golden robe stands and walks toward the newcomer. They smile, not warmly, not coldly, just knowingly. And then they begin to speak in a language you can't quite place. It's lilting and nasal, maybe an obscure dialect from the Ordos region or further west. Their words are light, but something beneath them glows like embers. Moments later, they disappear behind a silk partition. No one reacts. This is normal here. And that's when you notice the Khan watching you. He's reclined now, half-seated, half-lounging on the elevated platform. His expression is unreadable, but his gaze is direct. You blink, look down, sip your milk. He says nothing. but you feel that look all the way down your spine. You're in his tent now, and no one leaves the same as they entered. You probably thought wife meant just one. In the world you came from, marriage implies exclusivity, a shared toothbrush, an argument about curtains, a tax benefit. But in the private tent of a Mongol Khan, wife is more of a tiered system, a spectrum of power and proximity, where affection, alliance, and ambition all tangle together under woolen blankets. Tonight, those tiers are on full display. You glance around and try to piece it together. Who belongs to whom? Who's here as a guest? Who is a lover? And who is a political statement stitched into a silk sleeve? There are women seated on the main platform, women near the hearth, women behind curtains whose presence you only notice because of a shifting shadow or a whispered laugh. It's like a chessboard with no labels, and you're very much a pawn trying not to trip over a queen. The great Khans, beginning with Genghis, were never monogamous, not out of indulgence, but out of strategy. Marriages sealed loyalties between clans, absorbed rival lineages, and ensured offspring across regions. The first wife held real power. She ran the camp when the Khan rode off, gave orders, managed supplies, and often wielded more administrative clout than the men who technically outranked her. But the other wives, the junior ones, the politically strategic ones, the beautiful ones had their own influence. And in this tent, influence is currency. You notice one of the younger women stretching out across a low bench, casually a bit too close to the central fire. She has an emerald pendant hanging just above her sternum. It swings slightly when she laughs on purpose, you're sure? Her robe has slipped from one shoulder. Another woman, older, with an embroidered sash and a stare like cold steel, glances in her direction with barely concealed amusement. Let her play, her eyes seem to say, we've all played. Concubines, too, are everywhere. The word might sound diminutive to modern ears, but in this context, it's layered with meaning. Many were born of noble stock, given to the Khan as part of a political agreement or a peace offering. Some were scholars, dancers, storytellers. Their roles shifted with their fortunes, and fortunes changed fast under felt ceilings. One historian wrote that the sleeping arrangements of the Mongol Khans were as complex as their battle formations. That's only a slight exaggeration. The map of where each woman slept wasn't fixed, it rotated, based on favor, fertility, diplomacy, even omens. It's said that the Khan's astrologers were consulted before deciding who shared his bed on significant nights. Tonight, that decision hasn't been made yet, or at least it hasn't been made publicly. But there's movement. A quiet shuffling behind one of the silken partitions. A change in music, slower, deeper. A woman in a cobalt robe stands up from her seat, stretches as if just a little tired, and vanishes into a private alcove. Another follows. You suspect they aren't going to sleep just yet. There are guards posted near the rear of the tent, not to block anyone, but to watch. Not everyone is allowed to leave once the tent begins to settle into its nocturnal rhythm. People say secrets get spilled easier in the dark, and when you mix flirtation, fermented milk, and a Khan's curiosity, things can get loose-lipped fast. You shift again on your cushion, subtly. The furs are warm, but not all furs are created equal. The warmest pelts, wolf, sable, snow fox, go to the inner circle. You're sitting on something coarser, probably goat. Still better than dirt, but you're beginning to notice the hierarchy in every thread, every detail. The wives and concubines aren't just lounging, they're watching each other too. Every gesture is calculated. That laugh was a little too loud. That robe was retied too slowly. That hand touched a shoulder with just enough pressure to make a claim. It's sensual, yes, but it's also strategic. You begin to realize that this tent isn't a bedroom. It's a courtroom, a battlefield, a royal stage. Someone brushes past you carrying a tray. You try not to react, but you catch a glimpse. Bowls of crushed fruit, A small jar of sticky camel fat mixed with rose oil, and wait, what looks like a carved bone comb and a coil of dark hair ribbon. They're heading toward the back, and you can only imagine what's about to unfold. Historical records are sparse here. The Secret History of the Mongols, one of the closest insider texts we have, barely peeks into these private spaces. It tells us who married whom when heirs were born, which wives took charge, but not how they moved in the candlelight or how they negotiated passion alongside power. Still, some sources hint at specific customs. Favored consorts could summon musicians for private concerts. The Khan might spend a week or more with one woman if he sought her counsel. Some companions were said to be trained in ancient arts of touchless eroticism, more bodily diplomacy. And of course, there's the lingering mystery of what Bert, Genghis Khan's first and most powerful wife, thought of all this. Did she feel threatened, amused, bored? No one knows. But she kept her position through decades of war, shifting alliances, and an ever-growing list of rivals. That's not just luck. That's skill. You notice a pair of concubines whispering now, fingers interlaced, bodies close. Are they allies, lovers, spies? Maybe all three. You wonder how many games are being played right now, how many alliances are sealed not in blood, but in shared blankets. And then you hear it, a soft chime, a bell, barely audible, but it cuts through the laughter like a knife through buttered barley. Everyone pauses. The chime means the Khan has chosen. No announcement. No trumpet. Just that one note. A servant appears at the curtain nearest the hearth, gestures silently, and disappears. A woman rises elegant, slow. She doesn't look back. She walks with the confidence of someone who doesn't have to wonder if she'll be remembered tomorrow. The rest of the tent breathes again, as if collectively exhaling. No one comments, no one whispers. But beneath the surface, reactions ripple like stones dropped in a wake. Someone is slightly too quiet. Someone else suddenly bursts into laughter. A few women exchange looks sharp, knowing, utterly unreadable. And still, the night is far from over. Because where one story folds into furs, 10 others unravel around the fire. You'd be forgiven for thinking the real decisions in a Mongol empire were made on horseback, out in the open, sword in hand, wind slicing across the steppe. But spend enough time in this tent and you start to realize those were just the headlines. The real deals, the whispered agreements that shifted entire borders, those happened after dark, under furs, between half-laugh sentences and carefully timed touches. Power in this world is supple, slippery. It doesn't always look like a declaration or a decree. Sometimes it looks like a slow turn of the head, a pause before answering, a pillow shifted just slightly closer. Here in the Khan's private tent, bed politics isn't just a phrase. It's an Olympic-level event, and everyone here is a trained contender. You settle into your seat a little deeper, watching. There's no grand political debate tonight, no formal strategy council, but there's something better, a stream of small, invisible negotiations cloaked in smiles and silk. The wives, concubines, and honored guests all know their place, but that place is never fixed. And everyone is subtly jockeying to move one cushion closer to the fire, or the can, or both. Earlier, you watched one of the younger wives let her scarf accidentally brush the shoulder of a visiting chieftain. Now she sits across from him, half hidden behind a wine-colored curtain. They're laughing about something you can't quite hear. No one interrupts. Why would they? But it's not just flirtation, it's diplomacy. You begin to notice a pattern. Proximity is currency. Closer to the Khan equals greater favor, greater power, greater reach. But it's not just about sitting near him. It's about who he gestures to when he wants a refill. Who he touches casually, briefly, when making a joke. Who gets summoned behind the inner curtain, and who returns still glowing with the afterheat of private conversation. Historians still argue whether the Great Khans intentionally used this style of relational politics, or whether it simply evolved from their polygamous traditions. Some suggest it was a conscious strategy, a way to keep factions in balance through interpersonal entanglement rather than constant bloodshed. Others claim it was instinctual, an empire run not by spreadsheets or scrolls, but by intimacy and instinct. Either way, the results were real. Territories changed hands based on pillow talk. Entire campaigns were launched because one wife whispered caution into her husband's ear after the fire died down. And sometimes, perhaps more often than we'll ever know, alliances dissolved before sunrise, thanks to a single overheard comment or a lover's quarrel gone quiet and cold. You notice a shift now, subtle as a draft. The Khan, still reclined in his elevated seat, tilts his head and raises a finger. A servant approaches, kneels, listens, and departs through one of the smaller rear exits. No one asks where she's going, but a few guests glance at each other just for a moment. That glance says, someone's about to get promoted or disappeared. The fire crackles. You sit more erect, pretending not to track every movement. Across the tent, a woman is telling a story. Her voice is low, the kind that makes people lean forward without realizing. It's a tale of a horse that outran a sandstorm, of a soldier who slept through a siege, of a trader who sold his own beard to escape a debt. Everyone laughs at the right moments. But it's not just the story that holds attention, it's her. The way she tilts her chin, the way she pauses before the punchline, the way her fingers trace the rim of her bowl. She's not telling a story. She's casting a spell, and it's working. One of the Khan's senior advisors shifts his seat slightly toward her, just a few inches. But in this tent, a few inches are everything. It's easy to forget, in the haze of music and milk and warmth, that this tent is a nerve center. From the outside, it looks like a lavish portable home. From within, it functions more like a fluid war room. You're watching decisions unfold in real time disguised as flirtation, cloaked in laughter, danced out through glances and sighs. A servant returns. She bows low, whispers something into the Khan's ear. He nods slowly, then stands. For a moment, silence grips the room. Not fear, not reverence, exactly more like anticipation. The kind that rises when the main actor steps back onto the stage and everyone holds their breath. He doesn't speak, just walks to the central hearth. There, he picks up a carved wooden spoon, dips it into a bowl of something dark plums, maybe, or mulberries, and offers it wordlessly to the storyteller. She accepts, smiles, and tastes. And just like that, she wins the night. You'd be amazed how much power rides on gestures like that. A shared bite, a subtle nod, a hand resting a second too long on another's wrist. These are the moments that shape futures. They may not appear in the chronicles, but they echo down corridors of succession, strategy, and survival. And it's not just romantic or sexual. That's part of it, sure, but not the whole story. You're watching an entire political system built on intimacy as infrastructure. It's not who commands the most soldiers, it's who gets to wake the Khan with a whisper. Of course, not all such power moves are successful. You see it in the way some women sit a little straighter, laugh a little louder, reapply their coal with just enough drama to be noticed. Some are rising stars. Others are fading, trying to relight embers that have gone cool. And in the back, behind the half-curtained shadows, you suspect there are women who have given up entirely retired queens of the court, perhaps their power long spent, now watching the next generation take their turns in the light. There's something deeply human about it all. Lust in politics, comfort in competition, love and leverage woven together so tightly you can't pull one thread without unraveling the whole fabric. You lean back, full now, not just from the milk, but from atmosphere. The tent is alive with motion and silence, conversation and innuendo. Somewhere behind you, a bowl is dropped, and a burst of laughter follows. Someone starts plucking a stringed instrument again. A new rhythm builds. A heartbeat, slow and deliberate. The night deepens, and the warmest furs are already claimed. You think you're alone for a moment, maybe even safe. The tent has gone quiet. The wine has mellowed the music. Some guests slip into drowsy laughter. Others disappear behind curtains that flutter ever so slightly in the warm breeze. The brazier's glow makes everything look softer. Even dangerous people seem tame in this light. But you're learning, slowly. You're learning that there's no such thing as privacy in a Khan's tent. The watchers are here, and they never blink. At first, you don't notice them. That's their skill. Their whole purpose. They wear no sharp armor, no eye-catching brooch. They sit just outside the main circle, close enough to sip from a bowl, but far enough to be forgotten. You look again. That old man carving dried meat, not chewing, just watching. The girl refilling the lamps. She's on her third lap, but hasn't actually lit anything. Then there's the boy by the furs, pretending to sleep, but his chest doesn't rise. He's waiting, alert still. Spies, all of them. Some are official Naker, loyal household men trained from youth to watch the right eyes, memorize the wrong words. Others are less formal. Lovers, servants, dancers, paid once for their presence, then again for the stories they carry out later under cover of yawns and yawning sleeves. You shift slightly on your cushion, not too fast. You don't want to draw eyes, but it's already too late. One of them, a woman with her hair bound high in a warrior's twist, locks her gaze to yours. It's like a hook through your ribs. She doesn't smile, doesn't nod. She just looks. The Khans cultivated this theater with precision. Pleasure and pressure always played side by side. A court guest might be seduced one night and interrogated the next sometimes, without ever leaving the tent. Did you confess too much while the wine was pouring? Did your sighs betray strategy? Even the most private moans aren't entirely private here. You once overheard a tale, though whether it was true, who can say, of a concubine who loved a minor prince against orders. She would leave his bed before dawn, wrap herself in scentless fur, and tiptoe through the back of the great tent. But someone always knew. It wasn't the guards. It wasn't the wives. It was the mute boy who delivered coals to her brazier. He saw everything, said nothing. But the next week, the prince was reassigned to a distant border outpost, one that rarely sent letters home. Historians still argue whether the Mongol information web was more sophisticated than the courtly spy rings of Renaissance Venice. But one thing is certain, the Khans did not trust affection. Love, like silk, was lovely to look at, but liable to tear. And always, always flammable. Some of the watchers didn't even need to be in the tent. The tent itself watched. Its walls were thin, but not only to let in breezes. Conversations could echo softly to waiting ears outside. Firs near the entrance rustled not from wind, but from ears pressed gently against fabric. The design wasn't careless. It was intentional. Even scent was monitored. You learn this when a woman near the fire gently sniffs the sleeve of another. It's not rude. It's routine. The Khan's concubines were distinct fragrances, oils of juniper, horse-fat balm, or fermented milk. If one returned from the wrong tent, wearing the wrong perfume, someone always noticed. The watchers don't need weapons. Their blades are made of memory. They remember which lord laughed too long in a joke, which wife winced during a toast, which eunuch coughed right after someone mentioned poisoned honey. Later, when the Khan is alone or lying half-dressed and full of thoughts, they will quietly report, she touched his knee during the third cup of wine. Or, he hesitated before naming the tribute envoy. And these reports are acted upon, sometimes instantly. You remember one night, the laughter was louder than usual, the music looser. A wrestler turned bodyguard told a filthy joke. Most people laughed. One man didn't. His silence cut the air. The next day, that man was relocated to the camel supply detail. A mild punishment on paper, but he'd been the Khan's cousin. You begin to realize then that pleasure here is a test, not a break, that the softest tent is also a court. The women, the wine, the warm silks, these aren't just comforts. They're pressure chambers designed to see who sweats, who whispers, who betrays a glance. And you're sweating a little now. Because that watcher woman, she's still looking, still not blinking. But then something unexpected. She stands slowly and begins to circle the tent's edge. You feel your heartbeat tighten. She's moving not toward the Khan nor the other guests. She's walking toward you, not fast, but deliberate. And just as your breath catches, just as your mind races through every word you might have said too loudly, she stops, bends slightly, and picks up a dropped wine cup by your cushion. She looks up, eyes you calmly, then finally speaks. "Careful," she says, voice low. "You're always being watched." Then she smiles just a little and disappears back into the shadowed edges of the silk. You don't sleep that night, not deeply, anyway, not with eyes in the dark. The Khan's tent pulses with heat, laughter, and the kind of tension that always comes when powerful people pretend to relax. It's past midnight now, but no one's sleeping. Instead, the elite of the court lounge on embroidered carpets, sipping fermented Mari's milk and pretending their egos aren't on the line. The guards have stepped back, and the musicians are playing slower, lazier tunes. It's time for the games, those peculiar Mongol pastimes where victory means less than the performance, and loss can feel delicious if you lose just right. Someone has unrolled a lacquered box filled with carved dice and tiny ivory figures, a gift from a Chinese emissary. The Khan waves it off. Too stiff, too formal. Tonight calls for something more primal. So, with a clap of his hand, a new setup begins. A circle is cleared on the felt floor, and the nobles begin to strip, not completely, but enough to remind each other that tonight, titles can't protect you. You're motioned closer, not as a player yet, but as a watcher. Observers are part of the game too. Your eyes matter. Reputations are made or broken not just by what happens, but by what's seen, retold, exaggerated. The first round is simple, a balance game, traditionally used to settle drunken bets. Each noble must step barefoot onto an upturned saddle, balancing as they drink from a bowl held aloft by another player. The twist? The bowl is filled with thick, salted yogurt. Miss a step and it spills. Miss your mouth and you're mocked for weeks. It's childish, but this is no child's tent. One general thick with muscle and fame wobbles almost immediately, a ripple of laughter echoing as he falls backward into a pile of cloaks. His silk robe slips open as he rises, and though he quickly ties it, the glimpse is enough. A young merchant's daughter nearby lifts a brow, filing that moment away. Power can slit faster than fabric. Next comes the guessing game. A scented cloth is tied around each noble's eyes, and they must identify objects handed to them, some familiar, some less so. A polished bone comb, a strip of silk, a chunk of cold metal, but also a warm dumpling hidden in a slipper, or a carved phallus painted in gold leaf. The room buzzes with laughter, but underneath the playfulness is sharp observation. Who recoils? Who smirks too knowingly? Who can't resist touching just a bit too long? One noble woman, perhaps too bold, perhaps exactly as bold as she needs to be, guesses everything correctly, even when the item is a chilled grape tucked between a pair of calloused hands. The others cheer. The Khan smiles slowly. You notice how that smile doesn't reach his eyes. Historians still argue whether these games were merely distractions or deliberate tools of political theater. But watching now, you understand. This is courtship. This is posturing. This is war and silk and laughter. The final game is the most dangerous, the dare bowl. A large carved bowl is passed around. Each person must draw a slip of parchment. On it, a dare scrawled in various hands, some absurd, some daring, some plainly scandalous. Most are designed to amuse the Khan and, by extension, to measure your courage. To decline is allowed, but decline too often and you lose more than pride. A veteran horse commander draws first. His task: kiss the youngest guest in the tent. His eyes scan quickly and settle on a teen boy seated near the back, a minor noble's son. A peck is placed on the boy's forehead. The room laughs, and the bull moves on. Everyone pretends not to notice the boy's blush, but everyone does notice. Then comes a chancellor, stiff as dried mutton. His dare: trade garments with the person seated to your left. Unfortunately, that person is a dancer draped in beads and little else. The chancellor hesitates, then laughs, stripping down to underlayers and awkwardly wrapping himself in shimmering blue strings. He stumbles, nearly trips. The room howls. But the moment that turns the night, it's the draw of the Khan's third wife. Her slip reads, "Whisper a secret about your husband that could ruin him." You could hear a hairpin drop. Even the musicians pause mid-note. She smiles, strolls to the Khan's side, bends low. Her lips brush his ear. He does not flinch. When she's done, he nods once, expression unreadable. The bull continues. No one speaks of it again, but you'll remember the silence that followed longer than any of the laughter. Later, as the fire settles and the crowd disperses into corners, the games fade into intimate clusters, some pairing off for quiet conversations, others for not-so-quiet pleasures behind hanging veils. Titles have been shed, inhibitions too. You wander past half-unrolled sleeping mats and the mingled scents of perfume, sweat, and smoke. A noble with her robe half off is being fed roasted chestnuts by a younger guard. No one interrupts them. Power is about knowing when not to watch. It's here, amid the discarded dice and silk wraps, that real alignments shift. That merchant's daughter, she's being led gently by the hand into a smaller side tent by the same general who lost his balance earlier. Redemption, maybe. Or an arrangement. You sit now, no longer just a witness, but a participant in the unspoken rituals of Mongol intimacy. Games, after all, are never just for fun here. They peel back layers of silk, of pride, of politics. And once peeled, it's hard to put things back exactly the same. You're not sure when you drifted off. The warm haze of fermented milk, incense, and the soft rustling of bodies on layered carpets dulled your senses into a pleasant blur. But now, just as a breeze snakes its way through a flap in the felt, you stir, not from cold, but from sound. A voice, low and syrupy, close to your ear, not directed at you, not meant for you. But you're awake now, listening. A woman's voice, calm, deliberate. She's recounting troop numbers, movements near the river valley, possible raids the Khan hasn't yet approved. Her tone is relaxed, like she's reciting the recipe. The man beside her grunts in acknowledgement, then shifts his robe, rustling softly, silk over bare skin. She sighs, then chuckles. Something about the way she says, "He's too arrogant to see it coming," makes your eyes snap open fully. You're not supposed to be here. Not in this tent, not this close to the Khan's fourth concubine, and certainly not while she whispers classified knowledge to an envoy from the Western Front. But you had fallen asleep near a pillar, half hidden behind cushions, the firelight flickering lazily across your face. Now you're invisible in plain sight, a shadow among shadows. These are not accidental murmurs. This is not romantic pillow talk. No, this is the true court in motion. She continues, her fingers tracing idle circles on the envoy's arm. Tell Beta the horses won't hold through winter. If he waits until the rivers freeze, his men will walk straight into starvation. But if he acts now... Her voice trails off as the envoy pulls her close, and the soft smack of a kiss dissolves the rest of the sentence. This is how alliances are forged between folds of sheets and the glint of candlelight on bare collarbones. Historians often debate whether Mongol women were mere playthings or master manipulators. The truth lies, quite literally, between the pillows. Later, as the pair falls asleep entwined, you slip quietly out into the dim corridor between tents. You move with bare feet, ghost-like. Outside, the stars are turning. But inside this network of fabric, oil lamps, and murmured betrayal, the politics never sleep. You hear a laugh low, tipsy, male in turn to see two officials you recognize from the tax council sitting cross-legged, shuffling bone tokens. One leans in, whispers something, and the other erupts in laughter. You linger just long enough to catch the phrase. She said her dowry included the city's gate codes. Another chuckle. Another secret dropped casually, like it means nothing. But you know now, nothing is casual here. As you return to the central tent, the atmosphere has cooled. The games are over. The flirting has grown quieter, more pointed. Pairs and trios nest into corners, and the central fire is now just embers. A noblewoman with sharp cheekbones and gold-threaded braids reclines on her elbow, speaking softly to a tall figure in shadow. You recognize her. She's one of Vikagan's informants, rumored to bed, both men and women depending on the needs of the empire. Her lips curl as she speaks, and the man she's with leans in too quickly. Their conversation is rhythmic, deliberate. You can't hear every word, but you catch fragments. ... road through the valley. Supply wagons burned ... Her hand brushes his thigh. He gasps slightly, then laughs to cover it. Just like the envoy earlier, this man is being drawn in not just by her beauty, but by the subtle illusion that he's in control. And she, so elegant and composed, is offering not affection, but leverage, a trade, whispers for favor, intelligence for touch. The fire hisses. Someone drops a ladle into an empty pot. Outside, hooves stamp impatiently. Not everything is asleep. You crawl back to your own mat, pulse still high. But you lie there, unmoving, listening, because now you understand the rhythm of the night. Pleasure doesn't silence strategy, it amplifies it. Remember how Mongol women were trained? Not just in archery and horseback, but in negotiation and courtly charm, and more dangerously, in how to make men believe an idea was their own. And in these tents, beneath the official ranks and military reports, lies a second empire one woven in silk, perfumed with rose oil, and whispered during the long, intimate hours before dawn. One minor princess, daughter of a conquered Chinese warlord, was said to have rewritten regional treaties while her husband was too drunk to sit upright. The original documents, penned in fine brushstrokes, were swapped in the flicker of a lantern. When confronted later, he blamed wine and fatigue. She smiled, untouched by consequence. Historians still argue whether that tale is myth or fact, but everyone agrees that the new agreement stood. By now, you see the invisible ledger, not of coin or tribute, but of secrets traded for safety. Of glances turned to gestures, then to deals. Even the servants, those silent, gliding women who refill goblets and sweep ash from the fire, are listening. Sometimes they're rewarded with land, with protection, with powerful husbands too dim to ask where their wives got such insight. Other times, they simply vanish. A heavy curtain shifts behind you and you freeze. But it's only a dancer, barefoot, her bells silent. She's returning from a private audience, lips redder than before. She moves past without acknowledging you, but there's a scroll tucked into her sash. You pretend not to see it. By now, you realize that the greatest performance tonight wasn't the games. It was the illusion that this gathering was for pleasure. It never was. It was a summit of power brokers costumed as lovers. Every sigh, every stolen kiss, every moan half heard through tent walls, it all served something bigger. You remember the fourth concubine's whisper, the envoy's hungry nod, the informant's coy persuasion. You remember the way secrets were unwrapped as slowly and precisely as silk belts. and you understand why the Khans feared betrayal more than death. It didn't arrive with a sword. It slipped in under the sheets. As the eastern sky begins to gray, and the fabric of the tent glows dimly with morning light, you roll to your side. Sleep tries to return, but your mind won't quiet. Because tonight, in a place that outwardly smelled of cardamom and musk, you learned what the true currency of this empire is. Not gold, not horses, not blood, but whispers on silk pillows. The tent walls shift with the wind like lungs exhaling into the dark. You're already lying down now, the felt mat cool beneath your shoulder blades, wrapped in silence and smoke. The night has swallowed most of the camp. Campfires crackle low, their embers curling skyward in lazy orange spirals. Outside, only the snorting of half-asleep horses and the creak of leather saddles in the breeze remind you this is not a dream. And then you hear it. A step not heavy enough to be a soldier's, not soft enough to be a thief's. No barked orders. No guards calling attention. Just a movement, confident but unhurried. The flap of your tent stirs for a moment, and someone hooded, masked, cloaked in the shade of power itself slips inside. You don't need a name. It's him. The Khan. Not necessarily your Khan. Maybe not even the Khan officially camped here tonight. The masks have a way of crossing those boundaries. But the presence is unmistakable. Stillness woven with command, the kind of silence that makes even shadows hold their breath. His mask isn't elaborate. Just a strip of dark silk tied tight, covering the upper face, the eyes a gleaming mirror of torchlight, but it's enough to erase status, identity, expectation. The mask makes him everyone and no one. He sits without a word, legs crossed, hands resting loosely on his knees. You've heard the stories, of course. Everyone has. The Khan who slips through silk tents like smoke, showing up not just in the chambers of his wives, but in the tents of generals, advisors, even the lowless musicians. It's not always desire that brings him, it's curiosity, sometimes control, sometimes loneliness, sometimes just the need to remind others that walls mean nothing to him. In the Mongol world, power isn't confined to daylight hours. Historians still debate whether these midnight visits were sanctioned rituals, private indulgences, or strategic tests of loyalty, but you're no historian tonight. You're a witness. The Khan doesn't speak, he just looks. And it's unnerving, because in this moment, the mask reveals more than it hides. You feel yourself being studied, not for your wealth or title, which lie outside this tent, but for your reaction. Do you flinch, bow, smile, pretend to sleep? His silence is the test. Nearby, a second figure stirs a noble woman known for her sharp tongue and unblinking gaze during council. But here now, she sits barefaced and flushed from sleep, robed slack at her shoulders. She doesn't speak either. Their eyes lock. A full minute passes, then two. You watch a silent negotiation unfold, not of treaties, but of permission. And then the Khan moves not toward her, but toward the curtain that separates your space from hers. He brushes it back just enough to enter, and then, like a tide washing over rock, he's gone from your view. Not all midnight visits are amorous. You once heard of a musician, barely 16, whose tent the Khan entered just to listen to the boy hum lullabies in his sleep. The next day, that boy was transferred to the Khan's personal caravan, not as a lover, but as a keeper of dreams. Another story tells of a disgraced guard who woke one night to find the Khan sharpening his own sword silently at the foot of the bedroll. Nothing was said. But the next morning, the guard's honor was mysteriously restored. In the dark, the Khan seems less ruler and more myth. He travels without guards, without ceremony, choosing to enter lives the way wind enters tents, unexpected and untraceable. Not everyone welcomes it. Some cower, some resist. Some disappear soon after. No one ever says why. One night you glimpse a different kind of visit. A tent that should be empty, its inhabitant away for days, receives a shadow nonetheless. You trail behind at a cautious distance, keeping low to the ground, the sand muffling your steps. The Khan slips inside like he's done it 1,000 times. And when he emerges minutes later, he carries nothing, no documents, no stolen glances, no trace of scandal. Just silence. It occurs to you that these visits might be less about control and more about knowledge. A way of knowing who stirs in the dark, what secrets they whisper to the stars, what vulnerabilities they hide when they think no one is looking. This is not governance by law. It's governance by presence. And still, a part of you wonders, has he been here before? On nights you thought were yours alone? Is that why you sometimes wake with the sensation of being watched, even though the tent was undisturbed? One old woman you meet, a former tent attendant now kept on for her tea and gossip, tells you in a whisper that the Khan has a specific scent, something between sandalwood and fire ash, and that when she was younger, she would sometimes find that scent on the pillows of tents he never officially entered. Her eyes gleam when she says it. She doesn't sound afraid. No one is truly afraid. They're just very, very alert. Tonight, after the Khan departs, the tent feels different. The air thicker, though he touched nothing. The silence deeper, though no word was spoken. You roll onto your back, eyes on the ceiling where moonlight paints soft shapes on the felt. Somewhere outside, a lone horse exhales, and the camp shifts again. You wonder which tent he'll slip into next. The wine is sweeter than it has any right to be. Not cloying, just ... suspiciously smooth. It flows freely into your cup, and you're already on your third by the time the tent's flaps close behind you. You weren't expecting this. You came here with scrolls and seals, ready to present the treaties your sovereign drafted with trembling fingers. You rehearsed your greetings, your bows, your safe words. But no one warned you about this part. The tent is warm, too warm. And not just because of the braziers, but because of the eyes watching you over jeweled goblets. The occasional burst of laughter from veiled women seated nearby. The low hum of music that seems to crawl under your skin. This isn't a negotiation table, it's an invitation. And it's not entirely clear whether the invitation is to talk, drink, or something far less official. You weren't the first diplomat to discover that Mongol diplomacy often came wrapped in silks, spiced lamb, and suggestive glances. The Khans, particularly in the later generations, understood something that many rulers missed. Seduction was a weapon. Hospitality was a performance. And sometimes the best way to know what your enemy was planning was to get them drunk and into the wrong bed. Historical records from the Yuan court, as well as Persian and European sources, hint at strange, informal nighttime gatherings where emissaries were invited to relax before negotiations began in earnest. That might mean feasting with courtesans, joining a game of knucklebones with generals, or being paired off for rest with a suspiciously well-informed concubine who just happened to ask about your king's supply routes. There were rumors, for instance, about an ambassador from Kiev and Rus who returned home with more gifts than he'd arrived with: silks, horses, and a handmade saddle and a dazed, daffy look he couldn't shake. He avoided eye contact whenever someone brought up the phrase evening council. One chronicler wrote that his spirit was split in two halves, still lived at the Khan's fires. Historians still argue whether this was poetic metaphor or something more literal. The Mongol Empire was enormous, stitched together by many tongues and rival ambitions, and the great Khans knew that warfare couldn't conquer every border. Sometimes you needed to seduce your way past them. And seduction, in this world, didn't always mean romance. It meant distraction, comfort, confidence, getting the envoy to loosen his collar and his guard at the same time. You watch from a corner now as one of the newer envoys, a smooth-faced man from the west. Maybe Genoese gets pulled into a game of echo whispers, where each participant murmurs a confession into the next person's ear. Laughter follows, but the game never stays innocent for long. One of the women leans close to the ambassador, her lips nearly brushing his ear, and you see his fingers twitch. That's when you know he's already told her something he shouldn't have. Later, you'll hear that the same man, the one with the perfectly scripted speech and the stern face, was found in the morning trying to sneak out of camp with his boots in his hands and his hat on backwards. It's not that he was disgraced. No, the Mongols didn't shame such things. Quite the opposite, they saw it as part of the dance. And in fact, many agreements were struck not in formal sessions, but in the haze of mornings after, where what was said between shared blankets somehow felt more binding than what was inked on parchment. In some cases, the Khans themselves participated in this theater of diplomacy. Kublai Khan, for example, had a reputation not just for military cunning and administrative brilliance, but for knowing how to keep guests ... well entertained. Marco Polo wrote about his extravagant palaces and gardens, but also hinted at the women who served in roles far beyond concubinage, women trained in conversation, language, even espionage. Some of them had the ears of rulers and visitors alike. One infamous episode involves an envoy from the Delhi Sultanate who is reportedly paired with a Mongol courtesan named Asal Beautiful. Yes, but more importantly, fluent in Arabic, Persian, and the internal politics of his court. By the time the envoy left, the Mongols knew more about the Sultan's fears than his own viziers did. Scholars still debate whether Asal was truly a concubine or a cleverly planted spy, but her name appears in more than one record, often next to suspiciously generous tribute agreements. It wasn't always smooth, though. Some diplomats misread the signals. One Byzantine emissary, for instance, reportedly demanded separate sleeping quarters and refused all food and drink offered to him. He waited 3 days before mysteriously falling ill and having to be escorted home in a covered litter. Coincidence? Maybe, but the timing was poetic. You, however, are smarter than that. Or at least you think you are. You sip slowly, speak less than you listen, and try not to react when one of the hostesses places her hand lightly on your wrist and asks in perfect, unaccented Latin, "And how many soldiers are left in your eastern garrison?" Just a coincidence, you tell yourself. But as the night deepens and the firelight turns amber, your vision softens. The tent pulses with warmth and low music. There's something in the way they laugh, not forced, but knowing. You begin to realize that this isn't about seduction at all. It's about power, not the kind with swords and horses. The quieter kind. The kind that waits for you to undress, not your body, but your secrets. And when morning comes, as you fumble for your scrolls and try to remember whether you said anything you shouldn't have, one of the guards hands you a neatly folded tunic. It's yours, yes. But it smells faintly of sandalwood and ... victory. You smell it before you see it. A sweet, smoky something curling through the air like a cat, winding around your legs, neither incense nor perfume, and yet somehow both. You step into the tent and are immediately caught in the aroma's grip. It makes your tongue feel too big for your mouth, and the hairs on your arms rise as if they're trying to remember a forgotten name. The lamps here burn low, their wicks floating in bowls of oil scented with rose, musk, and something ... metallic. You aren't sure if it's just perfume or if you've already begun slipping into the next phase of the evening. Mongol camps weren't merely places of war planning and guttural laughter. There were corners of the encampments, often in the Khan's private zones, dedicated to rituals so subtle and ancient, they made politics look like child's play. You've wandered into one such chamber now, and your instincts tell you this isn't a place for negotiating trade routes. The woman in front of you, her face partly veiled with silk so sheer you can see the edge of her smile, says nothing as she steps closer. She doesn't need to. Her hands are slick with oil, and she offers a shallow clay dish toward you. The scent rising from it is even stronger than the air around you. Cardamom, something floral, and something distinctly earthy, like crushed roots. You dip your fingers in without thinking. The oil clings to your skin, warming unnaturally fast, sliding up your wrist as though pulled by invisible threads. This isn't just for relaxation. You know that now. These oils were part of a Mongol practice older than any throne. Women in the imperial camp, especially those assigned to care for visiting envoys or entertain high-ranking nobles, often trained in the art of the scented unraveling. It wasn't merely sensual, it was chemical, psychological. These oils were steeped in herbs known to soften the body's edge, even lull the mind toward confession. Some of the ingredients, valerian, saffron, powdered rhubarb, still show up in folk medicine today. Others? Historians still argue whether a few of them were psychotropic or simply powerfully suggestive. But there's more here than oil. As you begin to relax into the cushions, you notice small amulets strung across the tent supports. Tiny things, bone fragments, bird claws wrapped in silk, and stones etched with symbols that seem to shift when you don't look directly at them. You recognize a few from your own land, twisted variations of protective charms. But here, they seem less like protection and more like dot invitation. One of the amulets catches your eye, a smooth green stone hung on a red string, swaying faintly with no breeze in the air. As you blink, a rush of heat climbs your spine. Your host, if that's what she is, leans in and whispers a single word in a language you don't recognize. And suddenly, you're not sure whether the oil is on your skin or under it. This is the spell work of the tent. Not fireballs and lightning bolts, but the kind of magic that warms its hands on your ribcage and lulls your instincts to sleep. Not illusion, not quite, but manipulation of the senses so careful you don't realize it's happening. Mongol women were famed for their skills in herbalism, charms, and pressure point massage, what the Chinese called enmao, and what others simply called dangerous. There's a small carved box on the floor beside the cushions. You reach toward it and feel a static zing run through your fingertips. Inside are more tools of this craft. Combs of horn, flat-edged stones for scraping the back, tiny knives for splitting fruit or slicing threads, each one polished to a quiet shine. The entire room is a weapon disguised as a retreat. A courtier once wrote that to fall asleep in a Khan's pleasure tent was to wake up feeling either like a god or a prisoner of one. Some men wept afterward. Others returned nightly, unable to stay away, convinced they were under a spell. And maybe they were. Some Mongol women were trained to read breath rhythms, pulse shifts, even the dilation of pupils. One could argue that's science, or sorcery, or both. You lie back now, the oil fully soaked into your arms and chest, your skin slick and warm as sunlight. The music outside the tent has shifted into something slower, heavier drums softened by thick animal skins and the plucked strings of a mooring core, echoing like a heartbeat inside your ribcage. Your host begins to trace shapes on your skin, not quite letters, but definitely not random. Each mark seems to linger long after her finger leaves, like it's been etched into you. She begins to hum, and her voice vibrates through the air like heat rippling off stone. You feel your limbs soften. A small part of you wants to fight this to remind yourself that you are here on diplomatic mission, or perhaps as a guest of state, but your muscles disagree. Your tongue forgets how to argue. You begin to melt like butter left too long near the fire, and then comes the undressing. It's slow, reverent, less about lust than about revelation, layer by layer, not rushed, as though your clothing is a puzzle that needs solving, not stripping. Mongol etiquette held that garments could signify status, allegiance, even secrets. But in this space, robes are peeled away like bark from a tree, not just to expose the flesh, but to understand it. The tension between layers is deliberate. You feel the tug of your sleeve as it slides past your elbow and realize you've never been this aware of how fabric moves. This ritual, if that's what this is, isn't uncommon. Chronicles mention nobles being undressed with honor, a phrase that makes more sense now than when you read it. It wasn't a euphemism. It meant being shown the vulnerability of a moment and being allowed to exist inside it without shame. But it also meant being watched. Someone somewhere would know what you said, how you reacted, what you feared. There's an old belief, whispered among Mongol midwives and camp women, that Sen is the last sense to die and the first to betray a secret. That's why these oils aren't just for touch. They linger in your nose long after the touch fades. They write themselves into memory. And maybe that's the trick. You'll leave this tent tomorrow. You'll try to recall the negotiations, the terms of alliance, the political theater. But what you'll really remember is this. The way her fingers glided behind your neck like a breeze with intentions. The warmth of oil blooming across your chest. The flicker of amulet light dancing behind your eyelids. You'll remember how, for one night, someone undressed your thoughts before your body. And when you try to describe it later to a curious companion or a skeptical scribe, you won't have the words, only the scent. Faint, persistent, still clinging to the collar of your tunic like a ghost you asked for. The storm rolls in slowly at first, like a drumbeat in the distance, low and lazy. But the closer it comes to the Mongol encampment, the more it seems to stir something else awake. Thunder in the steppes doesn't just soak the ground, it loosens things. It cracks tension like a whip. Inside the grand tent of the Khan, you're nestled against warm silks and dampened laughter. Outside, the sky splits wide. You hear the shift in breathing before the lightning even flashes. The guards stationed outside the felt walls stiffen in their boots. Some of them glance sideways at each other, knowing the kind of night this might become. Not all storms pass harmlessly, and not all of them stay outside. In the inner chambers, pillows aren't just for sleep. You've long since learned that. The cushions here are overstuffed with down and rumors that warm bodies don't always wait for permission, and that stories told by candlelight can turn skin to flame faster than a roaring hearth. You lie there still as soft movement brushes past your feet. Someone else is here. A body shifts into the corner, cloaked and hooded, not entirely disrobing, but not exactly hiding either. It's common knowledge that when the rains hit the steps, the tents fill with steam of tea, sweat, and secrets. The Khan isn't present tonight, at least not that anyone said aloud, but that doesn't stop his court from continuing. The rituals of distraction. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were orchestrated or spontaneous. Some say the storms gave cover to quiet trysts. Others argue they were engineered meals salted just right to arouse thirst, wines poured a little longer to blur boundaries, and songs coaxed out by musicians with instruments as smooth as their glances. You hear a chuckle, low and velvety, from the shadowed left. A merchant's wife? No, maybe a scribe. Her breath smells faintly of ink and rose petal liquor. Her hand brushes your wrist as if by accident, but nothing in this tent is accidental. Not tonight. A low murmuring chant begins from the far end. A voice, rough and throaty, begins telling a tale, one of those long, winding stories that start with heroes and end in bathhouses. It's spoken in Old Mongol, the kind only the elders still use during the ceremonial nights. And as the story unspools, the audience draws closer, blankets gathering around bodies now damp with sweat, not from heat, but the sheer closeness of one another. You feel the vibration of a body behind you, not touching, not yet, but breathing, matching you. Waiting for thunder to give cover, and it does. A sudden crack splits the sky, and the closeness becomes contact, a shoulder brushing yours, a knee gently nudging your side, then retreating, teasing. The storm outside begins its slow lull, but inside the heat coils tighter. Not from fear, but from the kind of anticipation that makes even trained warriors falter. In the corner, two figures exchange something, maybe words, maybe more. You can't quite tell if they're fighting or foreplaying. That's the nature of Mongol love under thunder. It's never clear where command ends and consent begins, not because it's violent, but because it's ritualized. Dominance isn't declared, it's danced, traded, nipped, and tucked in with games that resemble wrestling, but end in tangled limbs rather than victory. You remember hearing once that the Khan favored stormy nights for choosing companions. Not publicly, not ceremonially. Privately, silently. The belief was that storms drowned guilt. Rain washed away the scent of betrayal. Lightning made even the noblest squirm, and in squirming, truths came out. In the tent tonight, that theory doesn't feel far off. A servant moves among the bodies, refilling cups and relighting coals that have started to fade. You notice her sleeves are damp, not from water, but from the hands that have brushed her as she passed. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't protest. She simply moves, like incense smoke, weaving herself through lust and half-lies. You close your eyes for a moment, trying to separate sound from story, but it's impossible now. The rhythm of the storm has matched the rhythm of movement within the tent. Moans and murmurs blend with thunder and crackling fire. Someone gasps, maybe from pleasure, maybe from having had a secret pulled too close to the surface. It's all the same in here. One older noble, slouched in the corner with his shirt open to the waist, begins telling another tale, this one of his youth, of the time he seduced the daughter of a Song dynasty envoy during peace talks. She wore bells, he says, so you always knew where her hips were. The younger listeners giggle, but the story's more than titillation. It's a confession disguised as nostalgia, one that only works when people are half drunk, half undressed, and fully willing to believe they're safe inside felt walls. Historians might try to dismiss these stories, labeling them distractions from empire building or exaggerations from chroniclers too obsessed with the exotic. But they miss the point. Mongol tents weren't just for meetings, they were pressure cookers. Of politics, of pleasure, of presence. The lightning flares again, and in that brief flash, you see it, two silhouettes pressed against the far wall, mouths finding necks, hips angling in exploration, then darkness again. Only now you're aware of how many bodies lie around you. Not all touching, not all moving, but all aware. The tent is a living organism now, breathing in time with the thunder. Hearts beating against hides stretched overhead. Someone whispers, he might come tonight. And no one has to ask who he is. The Khan, whether he's already here behind a veil or will arrive soaked and cloaked, no one knows. But the possibility electrifies the room far more than the storm ever could. It's not just arousal, it's performance. What if he sees you? What if he chooses you? And that's the strange thrill of Mongol night culture. You're always being watched, even when you aren't. The walls are thick, the guards silent, but eyes are everywhere. Tonight, maybe even the thunder's listening. As the storm outside begins to lose its edge, the tent doesn't. If anything, it hums with the aftermath. Clothes half back on, bodies now resting, some joined, some just adjacent, some alone but deeply flushed. Stories still echo in the corners, long after the fire dies down. No one speaks of love, exactly. But no one sleeps quite the same afterward. And tomorrow, no one will admit to remembering it. You're led by a young attendant, silent and sure-footed, deeper into the woods that ripple like ink under the flickering firelight. The air grows damper here, thick with the scent of pine sap and smoke. Behind you, the storm rumbles still, but it feels far away now, as if the forest has swallowed its voice. Ahead, a circle of flickering flames glows around a tent not marked by banners of war or the silks of a Khan's private quarters. No, this one breathes with a pulse of its own. Animal skins flap gently at the entrance. You're not told to kneel or bow or remove your shoes. You simply enter. Inside, time disorients. You're not sure if this is minutes after the feast, or hours, or days. Shadows are stretched and fluid here, bending around a great bowl of steaming water that fogs the center of the tent like a low-hanging cloud. Candles, dozens of them, drip slow wax down hanging ropes of knotted horsehair. A large black stone slab serves as an altar or table or something in between. It glistens with oils, and bundles of herbs crackle gently atop heated copper trays. You're not the only guest tonight. Around the perimeter of the tent sit men and women nobles, concubines, a wrestler with bandaged hands, a scribe still in his ink-stained robe. No one speaks. They wait for the moan, for the first signal that the spirits have arrived. A shaman enters, not a priest like you imagined, not a wrinkled elder with a staff, but a tall, broad-shouldered woman, half-nude, cloaked in fox fur and painted with fine red pigment across her chest. Her eyes are heavily lined in black soot, and from her neck dangle carved bone charms that clack softly as she moves. She walks with neither haste nor hesitation, simply owning the tent as if she had summoned all who sit inside it by sheer breath alone. She begins by pouring liquid from a skin pouch over the hot stones. An earthy scent floods the tent. You recognize mugwort? Maybe something stronger? She begins to chant, not loudly, not for show. The sound is intimate, rhythmic, and strangely circular, repeating and bending back into itself. It rises slowly. Her voice is low and guttural, then higher and breathier. The candles seem to flicker in response. You realize, somewhere in the haze of herbs and heat, that the moaning has begun, but it's not from pain or sadness. It's a kind of coaxing, like pulling threads through a stubborn needle, tugging at something unseen until it reveals itself. This isn't just ceremony. This is seduction of the spirits, of the air, and eventually of the guests. A second shaman enters, younger, leaner, his arms painted in blue spirals. He does not speak, only begins to trace symbols across the backs of those seated. You feel it when he reaches you, his finger cool despite the heat, drawing across your shoulder blades in slow, looping motions. No words are exchanged. The ink he uses smells like honey and something bitter beneath it. You do not resist. They continue like this, chanting, painting, breathing, and slowly the room begins to sway as if under a sea current. Eyes droop, hands clasp hands. You notice one of the nobles across the circle now reclines against a concubine's lap, his eyes closed, her fingers gently combing through his hair. No one stops them. No one even seems to notice. Or perhaps noticing is the point. The shamaness begins to remove her fox fur inch by inch, and each movement is like the peeling away of something not just physical, but spiritual, social roles, duty, pride. Her skin glistens, smeared in oil and paint, and she moves toward the altar like an offering made flesh. She lies on it not to sleep, but to become the centerpiece of what is coming. The second shaman kneels beside her, grinding something in a bowl bark, maybe mushrooms, something ancient and mind-altering. The aroma is thick and warm, like crushed cedar. Here, shamans weren't seen merely as healers or fortune-tellers. They were bridges. Sometimes they whispered to the gods with words, other times with sweat and flesh and smoke. Mongol spiritual rites, especially those rarely documented outside inner circles, often blurred lines between ecstasy and religious rapture. The line between trance and desire thinner than the silk veils that now drop across parts of the tent. You're drawn in, not because you're told to be, but because the air itself seems to hum against your skin. A warm hand slips into yours. You don't see whose it is. You don't look. That's not the point. In this tent, names and titles dissolve. Breath and touch become the only language. A prince may lean against a servant. A warrior may whisper to a poet. You who were once stiff with caution now breathe slower. You allow your shoulder to rest against another's. Historians still debate whether these rites were truly mystical or merely organized release valves as social ritual masked in sacred terms. Some argue that the Mongol elite, burdened by warfare and harsh codes, needed these pockets of sanctioned surrender. Others insist that these moments were spiritual necessities, where bodies became vessels for ancestral voices, unlocked only through intense sensation. The truth? You can't tell anymore. You've sunk too far into the rhythm. The shamaness rises again. Her mouth opens not for words, but a cry. The kind of cry that isn't pain, but revelation. The kind that stirs something deep inside your ribs. Others join her, not in perfect harmony, but in layered waves of low moans, hushed chants, and gasping breaths. It's not chaos. It's communion. The candlelight seems thicker now. You notice a diplomat one you'd seen earlier boasting about trade routes, now crumpled with a dancer, his ceremonial braid undone. A scribe is gently massaging the shoulders of the elder who once lectured about clan alliances. There is no shame here, only softness. Only surrender. And you, still seated at the edge of this storm of breath and spirit, feel your body lighter. Someone braids a strand of your hair, humming softly. You let them. You close your eyes. You listen to the moans, the sighs, the flicker of the flames. And then a voice in your ear deep, close, and unfamiliar. Now you're ready to be seen by the ancestors. You don't open your eyes. You simply nod. The storm is past, but the wet earth outside still smells thick and heady, like something primal has been stirred. The tents are quieter now, but not silent. Laughter ripples from a pavilion lit in soft amber, a temporary oasis set up for foreign guests, distant generals, and those favored by the Khan. You step over a discarded wine jug, careful not to trip on an embroidered sash that's definitely not where it began the night. Inside, the mood has shifted, no longer coy or ceremonial. It's loose, unraveled, boozy. You ease into a low cushion just as someone throws their head back in laughter sharp, unfiltered. You're seated beside a translator from Persia who smells like apricots and horse sweat. Across from you is a princess from the Caucasus, eyes kohl-rimmed, hair undone, goblet in hand. The air is thick with fermented Mari's milk and fermented confessions. You glance up. Even the tent's flaps seem to sag like they've had one too many. Tonight's gathering had been meant as a diplomatic softener, just a gentle toast after long negotiations. But the wine proved too sweet, the women too magnetic, the boundaries too fragile. There's a moment where someone fumbles a toast in at least 3 languages at once. You watch 2 men argue over the translation of eternal brotherhood, while a third man bare-chested and pink-cheeked mimes eternal backside and promptly falls off his cushion. Everyone roars. And just like that, defenses crumble. The Mongols were rarely drunk in battle, but tonight they indulge. This, historians agree, was part of a deliberate strategy. Alcohol loosened tongues, exposed divisions, revealed ambition and fear alike. Intelligence gathering didn't always require spies, when a silk-clad emissary would spill state secrets after 3 cups of arag and a lapful of dancer. You find yourself drifting closer to a man with a deep voice and gold-flecked eyes. His accent is foreign Russian, maybe, but his gaze is fixed on a Mongol woman weaving through the room. She's balancing a tray with 2 fingers, her back arched like a bow drawn halfway. Her hips speak fluent provocation. You swear the room sighs when she passes. He leans toward you, murmuring. She dances at the Khan's right hand, but only when the left hand's not looking. It's probably a joke, probably. That's the thing about these nights truth and rumor rub up close, like bare skin beneath layered robes. You catch snippets. Someone bragging about how he escaped a siege by hiding in a cart of goat dung. Someone else confessing he only married his 3rd wife because her uncle owned the fastest horses in Samarkand. Then there's a general who leans into a Greek. Envoy's ear and whispers something that makes the poor man turn crimson and choke on his drink. The laughter is warm until it isn't, because, as you now know, the Mongols loved games, but they also played them with knives. So when the general repeats the line a bit too loudly, and the Greek envoy responds with a raised brow and the tiniest curl of his lip, the entire tent senses a shift. It's like the wind changes direction, but endures. The Persian translator stiffens, the laughter tapers off. The general rises slowly, his cup tipping and spilling liquid onto his ornate sash. He's not embarrassed, he's calculating. Everyone knows what's about to happen, but no one dares intervene. Except one. She appears like Smoka Shaman's apprentice you saw earlier, with silver bangles at her wrists and ceremonial paint smudged like mascara after a good cry. She steps between the two men and places a hand on each of their chests. Her voice is low, hypnotic. She speaks not in Mongolian or Greek or Arabic, but something older soothing syllables that sound like river stones clicking in a slow stream. Both men blink, one exhales. The other takes a long sip and nods. The tension melts, but not before everyone remembers that these feasts, however sensual, were edged in steel. You breathe again. Outside, someone starts to play a stringed instrument, low, slow. It sounds like longing made audible. A woman leans against a pillar, her dress falling off one shoulder as she plucks the strings and sings softly about lovers lost to rivers, about warriors who rode to battle with perfumes stitched into their collars. You rest your head back against a silk cushion and take in the tent's shifting scent rosewater, horsehide, spiced meat, and warm skin. You listen to the quiet sounds of bodies settling, of feet sliding over rugs, of laughter that has turned drowsy. One of the dancers curls up beside a visiting Chinese scholar. He's trying to recite poetry, but she's distracted by the shape of his lips as he speaks. You watch her brush his hair aside. He forgets the next line. Somewhere, someone moans, not in pain, but like they're releasing something they've held for too long. A sigh follows, then a low chuckle. It ripples outward. The tent exhales. Historians still debate how many actual diplomatic agreements were sealed in bed rather than in writing. Some claim this was a myth encouraged by later travelers to romanticize Mongol customs. Others argue it was precisely in these sensual, ambiguous spaces beneath the veils and beyond the protocols that the real empire was maintained. Because when secrets are whispered with your hand on someone's bare chest, they tend to be remembered. You're almost asleep when someone near you murmurs, "Tomorrow, we ride again." You don't even open your eyes. You just smile and let the warmth of wine, stories, and half-dressed peacekeepers lull you toward the dark. Outside, the stars are out, but inside the tent, bodies shift and settle like coals in a dying fire glowing, sighing, sleeping. Your eyes flutter open to the dull orange of a fire's last breath. Ash clings to the rim of the low brazier, and a single coal flickers like the last heartbeat of the night. The rugs beneath you are rumpled with the ghost of bodies. The fur thrust slung halfway off your hip smells faintly of crushed jasmine and sleep sweat. Your lips feel dry, your hair smells of smoke, and there's a smudge of black coal near the corner of your left eye. You didn't put it there. You're not alone. Not in the physical sense, someone's breathing just a few inches away, and you're fairly sure you hear the soft rustle of fabric as they shift, but also not alone in the way that memories cling to skin after a night like this. Mongol tents were made for warmth, and warmth attracts people. Sometimes too many. You glance sideways without moving your head. There's a shoulder there, bronze and bare. A necklace of carved bone rests against a collarbone you don't recognize, and whoever it is lies still, their back to you, dark braid trailing like spilled ink onto the pillow. You could whisper, "You don't, not yet." Across the yurt, beyond the circle of sleeping bodies, someone's already up. A slender young man in a sky blue tunic cinched with a sash is quietly stoking the embers of a new fire. He's chewing dried plum and humming a chant that sounds halfway between a lullaby and a warning. He glances over and gives you a wink like he knows too much. Maybe he does. Last night was a blur of heat and honey wine, slow dances with too much eye contact, and games of guessing lies from truths that escalated far beyond mere words. No one speaks of what happens after the drums stop, but the sun speaks. It peeks through the hide flap of the yurt, filtering in gold across tangled hair, crumpled robes, and empty wine cups. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb the sleeping figure beside you, and gather your scattered clothes. There's your sash loop through the horn of a carved drinking vessel. Your undershirt is missing. Someone must have borrowed it or kept it. You drape a spare shawl over your shoulders and rise. The yurt smells like last night clove, fermented milk, pine smoke, and something else, something more human. Pleasure lingers like incense. Outside, the sun paints the horizon with the first promise of the day, but inside, stories remain suspended in air like mist. As you move toward the tent's flap, you notice him, one of the Khans' most trusted bodyguards, slumped against a wall of furs, snoring softly with a silly smile on his face. His armor is unbuckled at the waist, and there's lipstick on his cheek. You vaguely recall a moment near the brazier, laughter, a game of knucklebones, a dare to remove his helmet. You both lost, apparently. Near him, a diplomat from a northern tribe snores loudly, a silk eye mask crooked across his brow. His tunic is inside out. There's a bite mark just above his collarbone, and a perfumed handkerchief peeking from his belt that definitely does not belong to him. Historians still argue whether such tele-diplomacy was an accidental byproduct of hospitality or a deliberate method of disarming potential enemies. Either way, it worked. Many a trade agreement was sealed with lingering glances and rumpled bedding. You slip out into the cold air. It bites, sharp and unforgiving, as if trying to punish you for the warmth you just left. The steppe stretches wide and blue-gray under dawn's fingers, the grass still damp with dew. You hug the shawl tighter around your shoulders and breathe deeply. Somewhere, a shaman beats a drum slowly, marking the coming of day. Somewhere else, a pair of horses whicker softly, sensing movement. You walk toward the nearest stream. You're not the only one. A woman you vaguely recall dancing with is already washing her hands and arms in the icy water. Her sleeves rolled high, her eyes closed as if in prayer. Her long earrings tinkle softly in the breeze. You nod to each other without speaking. Neither of you quite remembers the moment you kissed, or maybe you both do, and prefer not to admit it. This is how it goes, the morning after a Mongol night. No one clings, no one questions. They gather their clothing, their pride, their talismans, and walk back into their roles as if nothing ever slipped, nothing ever cracked open. The man pouring goat smoke into a bronze cup was pressed against your back 5 hours ago. The woman brushing her hair at the threshold of her tent whispered scandalous poetry into your ear before falling asleep. They nod politely, as if it were all a dream. The Khan's own tent stands far off, surrounded by guards with spears and unreadable expressions. You wonder which tent he emerged from this morning. His or someone else's. He's known to walk in silence after midnight, hooded and barefoot, gliding like smoke between silk partitions. No one stops him. Few dare mention it. But everyone notices when a favored servant is promoted, or when a visiting dignitary returns home with a flush that outlasts the cold. The Khan's preferences are never declared aloud, but they're written across the steppe like hoofprints in the frost. Your feet lead you, finally, to your own smaller tent familiar, safe yours. A bowl of honeyed oats sits waiting on a woven mat. Someone left it for you. Or maybe for who they thought you were. The Mongols knew hospitality, but they also knew the silent exchange of gifts for silence. You smile with the bowl and eat slowly. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the new day beginning. Horses being saddled, orders being shouted, breakfast being prepared, the ordinary rhythm of empire. But beneath it all, a hum lingers, the memory of last night, of whispers and limbs and reckless games. The kind of memory that won't ever be spoken aloud, but will surface years later when you catch the scent of coal and fire smoke on someone else's skin. And that's how it ends, this night that technically isn't over but can never be spoken of again. Not properly. Not with words. Only with glances across a table, a half smile over a shared drink, a pause before speaking. These are the ruins we build empires on: stolen glances, smudged eyeliner, and the unspoken vow that what happened in the tent stays behind its silk walls. You sit cross-legged in the golden hush of morning, the felt of the tent beneath you still warm from the bodies that recently lay sprawled across it. The chill from outside is beginning to sneak back in, curling around your ankles like a cat long denied entry. The scents linger: rich oils, cooked lamb, sandalwood smoke, the sharper tang of bodies in motion. The air is heavy, not just with the weight of what happened, but with the unspoken agreement that none of it would ever be acknowledged aloud. Not fully, not directly. Outside, the steps stretch endlessly in every direction, their grass slick with dew, their silence broken only by the soft clinking of gear as the camp stirs. But in here, within the silk-draped cocoon of the Khans' private quarters, time holds its breath. You're still inside the world that formed in the dark, the world of whispers, slow games, and shifting power cloaked in fur and flirtation. Across from you, a woman traces the edge of a shallow bowl with one painted fingernail, pretending not to notice the smudge of coal beneath her eye. Her lip is bitten, not out of embarrassment, but because her mind is somewhere else, replaying something that no one else in the tent will ever fully understand. A young man beside her is lacing his boots too tightly, muttering something about treaties and river boundaries, though his face is flushed and the corner of his mouth holds the imprint of someone's teeth. You wonder who left it. This is the aftermath, the part no one records in scrolls or stone. And yet, it's here that empires truly tip, isn't it? Not always on the battlefield or in the court, but here, where the lines between lover and adversary blur under soft torchlight and strong drink. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan himself participated in such nightly mingling or merely observed, sending in his trusted generals to soften a diplomat's stance with charms and wine. Some believe he walked among his guests in disguise, not for subterfuge, but for pleasure, for the thrill of hearing truths not meant for a ruler's ears. Others claim he stayed aloof, orchestrating such scenes as one might a ritual sacrifice, knowing well the power of intimacy as a political tool. You lean back on your elbows and stare at the intricate stitchwork of the tent ceiling. Patterns of mountains and horses, suns and birds, all sewn with silk that was traded from far beyond these lands. There's something ironic about it. These Mongol warriors, so feared for their brutal efficiency, also crafted spaces of softness, of calculated sensuality, where weakness could be both exploited and adored. The duality hums beneath your skin, like the bass tone of a distant drum. Last night's stories return to you in slow waves. The shaman's low moan during the rites, the way two warriors silently passed a knife between them, not to fight, but to cut the seam of someone's collar. The loud laugh of the woman from Samarkand, who drank everyone under the table, then dared a prince to bear more than just his soul. And he did, mostly. There had been a game with dice and stakes. You still don't fully understand something about giving up your title for a night and becoming merely the tall one with the scar, or that smooth liar who smells of roses. Names dissolved. Nobility too. And for a few hours, everyone became someone else until dawn reminded them all who they truly were. You stretch slowly, the way a cat does after sleeping too near the fire. The embers are almost out now, but someone tosses in a pinch of dried pine, and it flares back to life just enough to cast a last dance of gold on the tent walls. You see a silhouette, long braid, bare shoulders, someone slipping away without goodbye. You don't follow. You never do. Even now, in the reflective calm, there are secrets pressing against your ribs. What you saw, what you heard, what you were invited to do, and maybe what you did. The taste of it lingers like clove and pomegranate, the kind of memory that stays with you not because it was forbidden, but because it felt like the rules had been rewritten just for a night. And perhaps that's the point. The silk tents were not just places to sleep or to hide from the wind. They were theaters, intimate, potent, and ephemeral. Performances played out between powerful people who knew that the truest negotiations didn't always happen with ink and seal. Sometimes they happened with a glance across a low table, with fingers that hovered just long enough, with questions asked in low voices as robes slipped lower, with offers that sounded nothing like diplomacy, but changed the course of alliances all the same. One scholar once wrote that the Mongol Empire expanded on horseback, but endured on pillow talk. You smile at the thought. It sounds ridiculous until you've seen how a general's stiff stance softens after a certain song is sung in a certain voice, or how two rivals emerge from a tent with tousled hair at an agreement neither of their advisors expected. You reach for a goblet left half full beside a sleeping cushion. The wine's gone warm, but it's sweet. A last indulgence before the day begins. You sip and let your eyes linger on the ones still slumbering sprawled like overfed cats, utterly unaware of the history they've written in sweat and sighs. Outside, banners flop in the wind, horses nicker. Servants whisper, the world continues. But you remain inside for just a little longer, reluctant to break the spell. You know that once you step out, you'll be asked to recount the events of the night, to draft a summary, perhaps, a report that how can you reduce this to bullet points? Two envoys shared a bed and agreed on a border. The Khan's cousin confessed he might switch allegiance. A dancer recited a poem so beautiful it made a warlord weep. No, those aren't reports. They're poetry. They're confessionals. They're the threads that wove the true fabric of this empire, and the silk tents never tell. They listen. They absorb. They vanish with the dawn, but you were here. You saw. You felt. And you will never forget what the flickering shadows revealed. Ending. You rise finally, careful not to disturb the cushion still dented from someone's head, and push back the flap of the tent. Morning spills in like a soft gas-pale gold and cool breath, with long shadows cast by stakes and standard poles. The world looks unchanged, as if none of it had happened, as if politics had not been negotiated between stolen kisses or whispered in languages half understood under silk sheets. But you know better. You always do. Your footsteps are slow, steady as you rejoin the outer camp. Already, scribes are hunched over their scrolls, noting arrivals and departures. Warriors stretch with blades in hand, pretending their muscles aren't sore from anything but training. The cooks are stoking fires, pretending not to glance too long at who exits which tent and with whom. No one speaks of the night, not directly, but everyone moves a little differently after it. Some with a new spring in their step, others more cautious, knowing too much was revealed. You carry your own secrets tucked between ribs, stitched into memory. The silk tent now flutters behind you like a dream half remembered. It never promises permanence. That's not its purpose. It offers something else, the freedom of the in-between, of masks briefly removed, roles momentarily reversed, and truths spoken in languages more primal than words. You glance back only once, catching the last glint of sun on gold embroidery. Then you walk forward out into the daylight, into the waking empire, into a world forever changed by the sighs, games, and glances no one will ever admit. But you know what the silk tents never told. and that is enough.